Welcome to the Chain Effect Podcast, where a physical therapist and a dietitian married with 2 kids juggle the struggle of running a business, raising a family, and prioritizing our own health, all while trying to have as much fun as possible.
We're your hosts, Taylor Pope, Doctor of Physical Therapy, and
Caroline Pope, Registered Dietitian.
Together we own and operate a health facility bringing together physical therapists, dietitians, personal trainers, and active recovery services to create what we call the Chain Effect. Nice.
I'm excited about today. Last episode, we talked all about CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, what they are, why to use them, especially for non-diabetics, and
a little bit about the science, right?
Yeah, the science behind glucose, insulin, the hormone insulin, what's going on in your body. And today we're going to get into practical applications, a little bit of personal experiences, but how to improve, how to monitor your CGM, what to think about, and how to change your diet to get more improved metabolic function.
And really just some guidelines on best practices, right? Because, we're all overloaded by data these days. You got, heart rate data, sleep data, and now we're talking about CGM data. And like, what should we be looking at? And what is good anyway? What should we be going after for when we're looking at our CGM data? Just like an overall bird's eye view.
Mm-hmm. And so we want lower glucose levels. And then we're talking about non-diabetics specifically in this episode. So lower is better. We want our glucose better, lower average. We want fewer and smaller spikes when you're looking at the graphs and the numbers, fewer and smaller spikes. And then we want a shrinking standard deviation between average highs and average lows. So what I like to tell my patients is we really want, if you can see a graph of your blood sugar, we want rolling hills instead of these high peaks and valleys. So these, intense peaks and then drops.
You want the roller coaster to be really boring. Right?
Yeah, just we don't want to go crazy.
You're just going over like some nice little, like a little toddler roller coaster, not something you'd have at
like
Busch
the little
Gardens.
wooden ones.
Yeah.
But remember the app. So when you're looking at an app and if you decide to use a CGM, those ranges are for diabetics. And so that's something to be wary of. Like if you see your time in range, you're 100% time in range, but it's counting from 70 to 180, I believe. And so for a non-diabetic individual, you really want to aim for between 70 and 120 milligrams per deciliter, 90% of the day.
Wow.
And you don't want as big of a spike and as big of a drop.
That's a great point because, just as we've been preparing for this, some of my patients have been showing me their CGM data and they're like, yeah, I'm in range like 100% of the time. And then you look at it and they're going up and down, huge spikes.
Yeah.
And they're staying in range most of the time, but drawing the distinction between this is something that was developed for diabetics and now we're hacking it for healthy people, or I guess non-diabetic population. That's a better way to say it. But that's a great point to draw that distinction.
Yeah. So basically when you're looking at the visual, you don't want it to be like, like high, low, and more stable. So what we found between ourselves and just the research is that everyone is different, first of all. So you could be eating very healthy. You could be eating the same diet as someone next to you or your partner, and your curves and your blood sugar levels could look very different. And that's why this is so cool to see what's going on in your body, just like a heart rate monitor, just like, a lot of different technology tools that we can use these days.
So tell us about some of those differences.
So, we found it was very interesting. Taylor and I, eat the same thing. Not the full day, but for meals and things like that. And I would have a much bigger reaction. I would have a much bigger spike to very similar foods. Now our portions would be different, but you're also a lot bigger. And so you'd think they would be
older.
And older. And okay. I was very frustrated. We'll just say that, especially as a dietitian. I eat very healthy, but there are times where I crave chocolate and candies as well. And I knew those were going to spike, but it was dramatic. But even with normal meals where there was a starch and then there was a protein and lots of vegetables, I would still get a bigger spike than you, unless I really worked hard on having no carb. And so there is going to be a difference. And your body, it is okay for your body to spike a little bit, even with protein. Because when I had a protein shake, just the powder, which has a couple grams of carbs, just protein powder, just water, I still spiked. So there wasn't even the carb from the milk, and I had a little bit of spike. And that's because protein is going to raise your glucose a little bit, because 58% of protein is going to turn into glucose. 100% of carbs is going to turn into glucose, 58% of protein, and then about 10% of fat. So when you just have a fat, and we could see this in our logs, if we just had avocado, which is primarily a fat, okay, there's a little bit of carbs and some good fiber, but it's primarily a fat, or if we just had peanut butter, primarily a fat, that is going to be the least spike of protein, carbs, and fat. So if you have that by itself, it's going to not spike as much.
And I think you made a good clarification. Like having a spike and having your blood sugar go up and then down is a normal body process. It's just the more it's happening and the more severe the spikes, the more you're going to contribute to metabolic dysfunction overall. Yeah.
And I could tell, I knew eating some stuff would spike me, but it was very good for me to see how much of a spike I would get from, like some chocolate by itself, or like some of the kids' leftover Easter candy that I grabbed as an impulse and was like, well, that's going to spike me. And I didn't realize how much it would.
Yeah.
And it was by itself.
And the IPA challenge.
We did different types of alcohol and things. And I don't drink IPAs anymore at all. I just don't have a taste for them, but I used to a lot. And seeing how that one IPA, I think I was on a fairly empty stomach. We did that together, and we compared values, and mine went way up. I think up to 165, and yours was
130, I think.
130. It was same.
Yeah.
We hadn't eaten, same thing. So everyone is different, male versus female, older versus younger, women in their perimenopausal state, with different hormone levels, different, stress hormones might be increased in certain people. So if you have a baseline higher stress level, cortisol and adrenaline are being released more often, or you might have higher base cortisol levels. That causes blood sugar to rise.
Yeah. And that connection between, perimenopausal, that's probably an entire episode.
That's a whole nother, women's hormones can affect it. So I like to think that's why ours were different, because I have more hormone fluctuations every week, and every day a woman's hormones is changing. But also some factors that can influence it is blood sugar levels in general, is dehydration, stress in general, things like sunburn, and then exercise, which we'll get into later. But there are so many factors that can influence your blood sugar levels.
And you talked about stress. And I think you and I have a little bit of a different sort of resting stress state, right? Maybe. You're a little more type A, I'm a little more type B. But also sleep too, right? Sleep is another thing that if you're not getting adequate sleep, you're going to see less sensitivity of your insulin, and you're going to have more of those ups and downs as well.
So overall, I would say you, Taylor, are more insulin sensitive than I am. And I'm not mad about it, because I want you to live forever. I want you to live longer than me. However, it is frustrating, because now this is something I want to work on more and more and more in my diet.
But I will say too, Carolyn and I have talked about a lot of, behavior change and, what works. Nothing has worked as well than the CGM for Caroline. Yeah. She has definitely, changed a bunch of things. We had that same 6-pack of IPAs just sitting in the fridge from like 4 weeks ago, and neither one of us really wants to touch it. And, not that we're against it, but we just know when you're looking at the data that this is going to give me a huge spike, and then I'm going to feel not that great afterwards. So you can really draw that really distinct correlation between what's going on and then how you feel immediately afterwards.
Yeah. So for some people, looking at the calories on a label might be motivation enough. And, for me, it's seeing that spike and knowing what that's doing long-term. And so I'm going to treat it more as like very sparingly, a lot less often. So everyone is different. Let's talk about what we want and what people can do. So we talked about the visual of, if you're looking at the graph, if you're looking at the numbers, when you're wearing a CGM, what you want those spikes to look like, or that graph to look like. More rolling hills throughout the day, pretty stable.
And you don't want it to go high and stay high, right? Because that would show, that there could be a little bit. I mean, if it goes up and goes straight back down, that does mean that your body,
that insulin is kicking in.
yeah,
it's
your
working.
insulin's kicking in and it's doing its work.
And the cells are sensitive to it.
And the cells are sensitive to it. If you went up and it stayed up, then that could be a sign that, hey, we probably want to get, do a little bit more analysis, right? Because that could mean that you're not having that bolus response, or you're not either releasing enough insulin in that bolus, or your cells are not resistant. Your cells are starting to become a little resistant.
That could be a sign you have a little bit of insulin resistance. But playing around with different foods and the order of eating and balance and everything, which we'll talk about, that's a good thing to experiment with if you are seeing that. So one big thing we can do from a nutrition side is the balance of our snacks and meals. And this is something from the first or second appointment with every patient I discuss anyway, but now I can see it in real time, even with me, how big of an impact it makes. So we really want to pair our carbohydrates. Since carbohydrates are the most likely to spike the blood sugar the most, we don't want naked carbs, or you can think about dressing your carbs. I call it carb pairing, whatever you want to call it. Even whole grains. So you might say, oh, well, this is brown rice, or this is whole grain bread, or this is a fruit. It's got fiber. This is a vegetable. You really want to pair that with a fat or a protein anytime you have it.
And I think that's really hard for people because they think they're making a good choice by picking a healthy and nutritious food. And we're not saying that those foods are not nutritious. They're absolutely nutritious and an important part of our diet. But timing when you eat them has a dramatic effect on your blood sugar, and thus the sort of cascade that we're going to talk about where, it's this whole like energy economic cycle. And, so thinking about, it's not a bad food, but how and when you choose to eat it is really important.
So a classic example could be you are hungry for a snack, you grab an apple. Oh, it's a healthy food. It's got fiber. It's got vitamins, minerals, hydration. Great. Apples are great. However, you can trial it with the CGM and eat it by itself, and then eat it with a fat source or a protein source, let's say a string cheese, a spoonful of peanut butter, something easy like that. Still an easy, quick snack. But not only is your blood sugar going to be more blunted, that spike is going to be more blunted, you're going to feel satisfied for longer as well because of that effect of the protein or the fat taking a little bit longer to digest. And therefore you're going to have energy a little bit longer.
And also too, right? Thinking about sort of stacking, thinking about your belly as this sort of, gravity is working with the food, right? That's part of the way that the food gets down into our belly is that, we eat it up top and then it sinks down into our stomach and sort of forms this tower of food with the hole in the bottom. So
kind of a funnel.
Yeah. If you're having the fat first, if you start your meal with a little bit of avocado, or you start your meal with a little bit of healthy fat and then put the protein on top, or start with the protein and then put the carb on top of all of that, you're going to get much slower absorption and thus more stable blood sugar throughout.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we both experimented with having some avocado. I was so mad because I had a sandwich with thin whole grain bread, one slice of bread, I think.
You had
with
avocado
some protein.
Toast, right?
Well, it was like a sandwich with avocado and turkey and spinach on one or two thin slices of bread. And that spiked me more than I would have liked.
Yeah.
So then the next day I had avocado by itself, maybe 15 minutes before. That did blunt the spike a little bit, but that's not always practical. But the big thing is you really just want to pair those carbs with other foods. If you want to get real nitpicky, you could experiment like we did and have the fat, a little bit before, or the protein, but make sure you have enough protein. First off, make sure you have enough, a little bit of fat, and then making sure you have enough fiber. And I'm not talking higher carb fiber sources, but vegetables, non-starchy vegetables are a really good way to not only improve your health overall and get all the vitamins and minerals you need, but have lower carb fiber sources, because fiber also coats the small intestine, the gut lumen, and it slows gastric emptying. So if you think about that funnel, fiber is important too, because that glucose is going to be absorbed more slowly. And that fiber just takes a lot for our body to break down, and it doesn't even fully break down in the stomach. That's where it goes to that large intestine, and the bacteria break it down into short chain fatty acids. But all that to say, even if you have, a little bit of vegetable at the beginning of your meal, like a salad, like restaurants, maybe you have a little side salad or something, that fiber before, and then your protein is going to be helpful. You really just don't want to eat your starch at the beginning of the meal.
Yeah. And I think we've, sort of been conditioned, you say the salad, sort of been conditioned to think about that iceberg lettuce as having like no nutritional value.
Yeah.
But instead, it actually has a ton of value for our blood sugar because it does have a lot of fiber, and it's going to slow down that absorption that you talked about.
Yeah.
And I think it's important too, just to draw the distinction that, what we're talking about right this second is about improving your metabolic function throughout the course of your day, and thus throughout the course of your life. But there are some changes that you might want to do if you're purely going for performance, right? Because you don't want to have like a big fatty avocado right before you're going to go exercise.
No, that would not feel good.
So, we are talking mostly about, sort of those daily decisions. And we'll talk about, how we might want to approach exercise and performance a little bit differently.
These are things, they do go hand in hand with fat loss and feeling more full for longer, and therefore reducing your caloric intake. So these are the same things I talk about with patients for weight loss. But we can see that they translate into metabolic function, improved metabolic function as well. So, if you eat vegetables at the beginning of the meal, or maybe you have your protein and your low calorie vegetables, low carb vegetables, I guess you could say, at the beginning of your meal, you're also filling up on the really important stuff for your body that you may not want to have after your carb. So a good visual is like you're at a buffet, you make a plate, you have your mac and cheese and mashed potatoes, and then you have a little salad, and then you have your chicken. A lot of us might go towards that mac and cheese first because it's so delicious, and you're like, oh my gosh, and it's a carb, you're able to eat more and more and more, and it's harder to stop. Well, are you going to really want to have the salad and the chicken after that? It's not only bad for your blood sugar, but it's also, you're not going to want to have those healthier options. And then you might fill up on that stuff and not have as much protein, which we know most of us are lower in protein than we should be. And so that's another reason I talk with patients about, like, try to get your protein and your veggies in first. Leave that carb like a dessert, whether it's a starchy vegetable, sweet potato, regular potatoes, something like that, or whether it's rice or, pasta, anything like that. So leave that starch. The big message here with the order of eating, leave that starch at the end.
Yeah. Because carbs are so much more calorically dense too, just like gram for gram. What's the ratio? You always tell me about the grams are like carbs are, a gram of carbs is this much, a gram of protein is this much calories.
No, it's not so much about that, but carbs are 4 calories per gram. Fat is actually more dense. That's 9 calories per gram. Protein and carbs are 4 calories per gram. But we can eat carbs. It's more about how they're digested. We tend to be able to eat them so much faster. They start digesting in our mouth with the salivary enzymes, amylase and different things like that help break it down. So I think they're faster to eat. And they're more, we want them. They're like more comforting. But if you think about, you could eat so many more, depending on what the carb is. You can eat so much more French fry. Like you could eat a pound of French fries, but you probably wouldn't be able to eat a pound of pure potatoes. I think that's what we've talked about before. Just because how they're cooked and how they're, French fries don't take as much work to digest and all of that because of how they're
processing cooked. And the fried.
Yeah. But the key here is treat those carbs like dessert, whatever it is, and therefore you're probably going to get a much more balanced meal, healthier meal, and your blood sugar isn't going to spike as much. Also, having a small dessert, another practical implication, if you do have a dessert, have it with a meal or at the end of a meal or a snack, not before and not by itself. So this is tough when you have desserts lying around the house. This is where it's a lot of behavior change. When you're working on nutrition changes, it's a lot of behavior change. So if you have brownies on the calendar or there's donuts sitting out, a lot of people might swipe by, grab one, eat it as a snack or not with a meal. We really need to go back to that old school thought of having some dessert at the end of a meal. And that's That's going to help your blood sugar spike.
And hide that stuff deep.
And put it away.
Put that stuff deep in the pantry where you're not looking at it over and over again. Having to say no to something over and over again just crushes your willpower overall, right? So you want to have that stuff hidden away. And the other thing too, I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand with, snacking, right? Like snacking while you're making meals. I know so many people who just, they're cooking dinner. Like, oh, that's a great time to like bust out the hummus and chips to have a little snack. But you're just driving that blood sugar up right before you're about to do the best thing for yourself, which is have that protein, have that.
And behaviorally, you want that balanced meal that's going to help your overall health and fat loss. And then also it's going to spike your blood sugar. And that's a finding for myself. I would say working from home, being home, giving this kids snacks all the time. I think my biggest finding is I eat so many times per day. Now it's mostly healthy stuff and very balanced snacks. I'm always thinking about the balance. But when you're getting snacks out, you're thinking crackers, pretzels, what's going to go with the protein or fat. And that I did see a lot of spikes in my blood sugar, although it wasn't always high spikes. It was just spiking too much throughout the day when I really didn't need. I probably wasn't truly hungry and I didn't really need it, but I would just get a little bit here, a little bit there. Healthy, not a ton of calories. However, I could see what my body was doing.
And so it's probably worth saying too that, even foods that are the same, but just are in a different form. So having an orange is different than having an orange smoothie is different than having orange juice, right?
Exactly.
And so how it's processed along the way is going to determine how quickly it's absorbed into your bloodstream.
Exactly. Yeah. We always talk about sugar sweetened beverages and added sugar, of course, in our other podcast about added sugars, but juices as well. I mean, it's natural. It's from fruit.
It's
However,
100% juice.
It's 100% natural. It's 100% juice. However, look at the sugar on that and no, you don't have the fiber to blunt that spike. And even if you,
even if I have the full pulp.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how many apples is it taking to get that 1 cup of apple juice? Or how many oranges is it taking to get that 1 cup of orange juice? So that is a lot of sugar, especially if you're reading the nutrition label. You see it's all natural sugar under total sugars. It's not added for the most part. But that is going to spike your blood sugar because it doesn't have the fiber in it and you're not pairing it with something else usually. And then sugar sweetened beverages, it's just all added sugar. So sodas or sweet tea. The smoothies still have fiber in them from the fruit. So at least that has the skin and, the pulp and things like that. However, it's broken down for you. So your body is not digesting it. And so that is going to have a bigger spike as well. But you can add in some fats and proteins to help with the spike. But what I found is when I had a smoothie, even with protein powder and some frozen cherries, some spinach, some flaxseed, I add it all, being the dietitian, I'm like, let me throw in some flaxseed, anything I can sneak in. I had a huge spike compared to just the protein in the water, which still was a little bit of spike. And I was really mad about that because I was like, here I am having all these nutrients at the beginning of the day, trying to balance it out.
And then calorically too, like those smoothies can add up.
They can add up a lot.
When I was trying to do a smoothie in the morning and all of a sudden like I was seeing the scale go up and it's like, yeah, you're adding in like 500 calories to your meal first thing in the morning. And then, the blood sugar spike, you're ramping that up.
And what I usually find, and this confirmed it, is I am really hungry after a smoothie. They don't do it for me, whether I add a protein powder in there, peanut butter, whatever I add in their flaxseed. I'm like, oh, this should keep me full. Some people do feel really full after smoothies. I do not. And now I know my body is just reacting. It's having a spike. And then therefore it drops pretty quickly, which means I'm not satiated for very long.
Same with like oatmeal, right? For you.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very good example. I tried, again, as an experiment during the CGM, the last one I had, I did oatmeal. And again, I added in what I added some coconut oil, some chia seeds, coconut oil as a fat, and cinnamon, and I think some frozen blueberries, not much. And it spiked so hard. And I don't do even a full serving of oatmeal. It was like, usually half a cup is a serving. I think I did a third of a cup, and it spiked me so high. And then I don't feel full at all. And I hear that from a lot of people. They think oatmeal's healthy for them. And they're like, well, I just know it's healthy. Yes, it's a great food and has some good fiber and has some protein as well. But for a lot of people, it does not keep them full. And so it showed me even adding all these things to it to reap the benefits of a more balanced meal, it is not very balanced for me.
Right.
And it's not going to keep me very full.
And that gets back to like our first point too, which is everyone is different. And so, how would you know for the people that do feel super full off of oatmeal, maybe something's different. Maybe something different is happening.
Yeah, they
to
might
their
have
blood
more
sugar.
of a rolling hill with that oatmeal.
So that's why, getting this data and getting this data for yourself as an individual is super important. So we've talked a little bit about, timing of, intermeal, right? So like timing in the meal of different macronutrients. Tell me a little bit about, timing throughout the day.
What we know is eating earlier in the day is going to be better for controlling your blood sugar levels. And this is where it gets tricky with those who might do intermittent fasting, which can work really well for some people. But we know that insulin is not as reactive at night. So insulin is a hormone, just as a review, that actually decreases the blood glucose, gets it into the cells, and it is kind of a growth hormone. Melatonin, which comes out, is produced more by the pineal gland at night to get you tired, to help you go to sleep. It actually inhibits insulin secretion by binding to receptors on the pancreas where insulin is released. And so that's a tricky thing. So this goes to, this kind of explains why we hear it a lot, but we don't know the exact mechanism like this. But people are eating late at night, like, oh, they stay up late, they snack. We're like, well, that's more likely to turn into fat. It's maybe not going to be digested as well. It's not great for our metabolic function because your blood sugar is going to spike and insulin is not going to be secreting as well. So that blood sugar is going to stay higher. A lot of times I see in patients, if they snack and eat later at night, especially something with carbs in it, their blood sugar in the morning is higher. So their fasted blood sugar is higher, which is not great on a normal basis, on a regular basis. And, insulin is just not working as well. So you might store when your body at night, it's in more of like a anabolic state versus catabolic. So not burning energy, but you're kind of slowing down. Everything's growth and refuel, resting.
That's how it should be, right?
Right. And so if you're eating, it kind of messes up your whole circadian rhythm and what's going on, and your body is more likely to store that food as fat for later. So eating earlier in the day is going to be better. So even if you do intermittent fasting, it's not ideal for everyone's schedule, but I usually recommend if you can shift it earlier in the day, that's better. So don't wait till 12, 1 to eat. Maybe you do it a little bit earlier in the day, like 10 to 6 you're eating, or 11 to 7, so that you're not eating late at night.
And that was that big study somewhat recently, right? Where they did this huge intermittent fasting study. And what they found was the window of time that you were fasting mattered, but the people who did the best were the ones who ate early in the morning and then stopped eating. So their window was just like moved up. So
that would make sense.
Yeah, they still did like the same fasting. I think they did 12, 14, 16, but across the board, the people that did the best were the ones that started their eating window early and then finished early.
Like if you could, I've had patients who eaten 8 to 4, they eat dinner at 4, and that's not practical for a lot of people. And also if you push dinner back, you're waiting to eat till 12, and then your window is 12 to 8. Let's say if you want to do an 8-hour eating window, a lot of times dinner is going to be your biggest meal because you're just starving. You're like making up for the day. So if you can start earlier, feed your body. Your body needs energy early in the day, especially if you're exercising or your job is active. It's going to be better off because you're likely to be more in control by that last meal.
Right. And that kind of goes to what we always talk about with intermittent fasting. Like a big reason that it works is that you're in a little bit of a calorie, you're like plugging in a calorie deficit. And then if you're hammering the protein, it's just hard to get enough protein. So you're going to be doing less calories. So yeah, there's that whole sort of
you're going to be more
there.
full from the protein you are trying to get in. So what you can do, try to eat earlier in the day, try to have a cutoff time, that can help. And also you have worse sleep quality with blood sugar variability during the night. So like people that eat late at night, especially more carb things. And also we have less self-control at night. Let's be honest. Like if you're watching TV, if you're doing some mindless eating, you're stressed out, staying up working at night, studying for school, it's likely going to be more carb heavy choices. But you tend to wake up in the middle of the night too with those blood sugar drops that come off of that spike. So a lot of people might wake up kind of stressed or have some anxiety. I've had patients who wake up kind of anxious in the middle of the night, and they're using their CGM and see that that's when they tanked low, which could have been from eating late at night or what they had as their last meal.
Oh, so interesting.
So then it's going to disrupt your sleep, and then that's going to throw off your blood sugar levels as well. And that brings us to improving sleep is another thing that you can do, which is easier said than done. But if there are ways to improve your sleep to help your blood sugar levels not spike as much, then that's going to help your blood sugar control.
So yeah, going to sleep earlier.
Yeah.
Right. Don't stay up. Don't scroll.
Limiting the screens right before bed. All the typical
all the
things you hear, that's going to help your blood sugar control the next day. And also your food choices. We know the psychology of that. If you don't sleep as well, you're going to choose more higher carb choices, food choices. And then there we go. It's going to
just because they say
sugar.
like, don't try not to, try to finish eating 2 hours before going to bed. That doesn't mean like stay up later just because you ate at 9 o'clock. Right.
Yeah.
So next, talking about exercise.
Yeah. Let's talk about exercise.
That's such a huge thing. And that was one of the things that I really, took a lot of information from, with the training that I do for Ultimate. I was kind of amazed at how an intense practice or an intense training session not only affected my blood sugar that day, but affected my blood sugar for, the next 24, even into the next day.
Yeah. So it increased that insulin sensitivity.
Right.
And you saw that in your levels.
Yeah.
Because you eat the same things day to day usually.
Yeah. And I was down and even eating some more like carb centric stuff after, the next day, it would spike me less. So we wanted to dive deeper into that to really understand what's happening. And, what's happening when we start exercising and having that, the intense exercise is first, your body is going to burn up all of the glucose in the blood. And that's sort of that like fast acting, high energy, fuel that we have. And then your muscles and your liver are going to start, going through the different processes. I think in the liver, it's called glycolysis, or it releases glycogen, but then your muscles store glycogen and start releasing,
which is glucose, leftover glucose.
Yeah.
You store it as glycogen,
which is releasing that glycogen into the bloodstream
to break down into glucose for energy.
Yeah, exactly. And so during that intense exercise, you're depleting all of the muscle's glycogen. And so you're going to see, even if you were fasted, you're going to see a blood sugar spike, even if you've had nothing to eat. And then, but what's happening is instead of insulin being the main driver of that, replenishment, your muscles are just going after and taking all the available blood sugar around back into the muscles to replenish.
The more they contract, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like the more intense the exercise, the more your muscles contract, the more your body is going to be in that glycogen deficit state. And it's going to be just taking all the available energy into the muscles first to replenish those. And then you're going to be getting back to like your normal state, but you're at a higher insulin sensitivity, which we know is a good thing. Your body's going to be more responsive to the insulin that's around. And so you're just going to have this like lower state throughout. And that is really good for improving your metabolic function from day to day and improving weight loss and things like that. For performance, it's a little bit different. And for performance, we do want to use some of those carbs because you need that energy. And so like having some carbs like right before your workout and having it like a little bit during, so that you do have that like continual fuel source, especially if you're engaging in like hours long activity or like more endurance type activity, but you're still going to have that nice long tail afterwards where you're going to be more sensitive to insulin.
And that's up to 48 hours, right?
Yeah, 48 hours. So yeah, the research is showing that for 48 hours after that intense exercise, that you're going to be improving your insulin sensitivity. And it has this sort of compounding effect when you do it on a regular basis. So you can really sort of over time improve your metabolic function by continuing to do strenuous exercise. And it is a little bit blunted though, if right after you exercise, if you go for like a super carb centric meal, you're going to blunt that insulin sensitivity a little bit, which if you're thinking about performance, you're probably trying to like gain as much fuel back into your muscles kind of as fast as possible. So if you're exercising the next day again and going really hard, or you're in a competition that's multi-day, you probably do want to have a few more carbs. But if you're just trying to improve your metabolic function and, over time, like lose weight, then you can get more of a compounding effect if after you exercise, you go for more protein centric meals and try to like do the same things we've been talking about.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So you may not, for a recreational gym goer, you're working out, going to a class, doing a home workout, going for a walk, you may not really need a carb snack before. You may not really need to replenish those glycogen stores after for kind of a shorter, moderate workout. Focus really on the protein within an hour, a good source of protein after. And this is so interesting because it's showing us again why exercise is beneficial for everyone, especially diabetics, given all this. And especially, anyone, not just for burning the calories, but for making our cells more insulin sensitive.
And I've heard some great tips too, where, it's talked about, try to bring your muscles to a fatigue state several times a day. And it doesn't have to be like one big long workout where you do like full body, but maybe at different points during the day, you do like 20 push-ups, or you do 50 sit to stands, or 20 lunges on each side, where you're going to give yourself a little bit of that muscle burn, and that's going to help just overall kind of keep that blood sugar and that insulin sensitivity at a good state.
Yeah. All this is so interesting because it makes me think of traditional cultural like habits or old school habits, you could say, that we've kind of gone away from. And I'm wondering if this is part of the reason why our metabolic dysfunction rates are so high, especially in America, or they're trending, we're seeing more and more cases of metabolic dysfunction.
Like when you say traditional, do you mean like going out and like killing the animal and like hiking it back into, or you mean like...
Well, yeah, maybe. But I mean like screens, when we had less screens, maybe families were going for a walk after dinner, or couples were going for a walk after dinner, or moving around the house instead of sitting and watching TV or their iPads, or eating a salad before a meal at a restaurant and at the house. Like I remember we used to do that growing up, and I think a lot of people did that more, where you'd start with a salad and then have your balanced meal, balanced meals in general, balanced snacks in general, where there weren't as many processed foods to grab.
And what about just like eating at the table?
Yeah, slowing
versus
down.
Eating on the couch? There's something to be said about eating upright, right? So just like sitting up as opposed to like being like half slouched down.
Well, slowing down eating, eating at the table is going to naturally slow you down. You're having conversation, and that's going to lead to a less of a spike with slower eating. And then also things like savory breakfasts instead of sweet, toaster strudels, Pop-Tarts, pastries, toast and jam, frozen waffles with syrup, cereals. Oh my gosh, cereals are just everywhere. But, I think back old school breakfasts, I'm thinking like in the 50s, eggs and toast. Hey, it's balanced. You're having a carb. Maybe you had jam on the toast, but it's eggs, it's bacon, it's whatever, more of a balanced sit down dinner than something grab and go that's full of refined carbohydrates and sugar.
And so the English breakfast too, right? I mean, that's like beans and eggs and blood sausages of all types, and just a ton of like fibrous stuff. Yeah.
So something to think about for sure, going back to pulling from those older traditional, eating habits and exercise habits. So we hope this was insightful on telling you some practical applications. If you decide to use a CGM, we can help you through the process as well. We can, work with you to do trials and things like that. If you are interested, email Caroline@chaineffect.us, or if you have any questions about the process, we'd be happy to answer them for you.
Also be careful because there's a lot of services out there that are charging $300 a month for you to do a 2-week trial when, hey, you can get a whole month of it for $70 if you just have a doctor's prescription. And in 2 months, there's going to be an over-the-counter version that's coming out this summer. So there's a lot of businesses out there that are really trying to take advantage of this. And a lot of them, they might be a good service, but they're really charging you a lot more for something that you can get fairly cheap.
Yeah. And then we'd encourage you work with a dietitian if you can, or work with your provider. Do some trials through it. Since you have likely a 2-week supply, you can get a lot of info and a lot of data about your body and what it's doing in that time. So thanks for listening to all of our CGM talk, and we will catch you next time.
Check you later.